Azerbaijan, in this regard, expressed his serious concern over unequal and unfair distribution of vaccines against COVID-19 between developing and developed countries. Using this opportunity, we call on all states, international organizations, international donor community, vaccine producers, and other stakeholders to ensure affordable, unhindered, timely, and equitable access by all countries to the vaccines against COVID-19. Madam President, strengthening democracy and protection of human rights are among top priorities of the Republic of Azerbaijan. The ongoing reforms carried out in the country encompass a wide range of activities, including the recent initiation of dialogue with political parties, support to the development of media, creating better conditions for people with disabilities, empowerment of women and youth, widening the scope of transparent and efficient public service delivery. Azerbaijan enjoys fruitful cooperation with UN human rights mechanisms in order to support the important work of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Azerbaijan regularly makes and will continue to make financial contribution to the OHCHR. We recognize the important role of the special procedure mandate holders of the Human Rights Council in promoting human rights through cooperation and dialogue with member states. Therefore, we have extended standing invitation to all mandate holders. Madam President, 2021 has been proclaimed as the International Year of Peace and Trust by the relevant UNGA resolution. This year will also be remarkable for Azerbaijan since it enters into post-conflict recovery and rehabilitation phase following the liberation of its territories from almost 30 years lasting occupation. Having exploited the political settlement process as well as Azerbaijan's commitment to this process for almost 30 years, Armenia took consistent steps to consolidate the results of occupation of territories of Azerbaijan, aiming at their annexation. These included, among others, implantation of settlers into the occupied territories, destruction, pillage and looting of historical and cultural heritage, illegal exploitation of natural resources, misappropriation of private and public property in the seized lands. Series of great crimes have been committed by Armenia against the civilian population of Azerbaijan, as well as its cultural and infrastructure throughout the years of occupation. The recent aggression by Armenia, starting from 27 September 2020 against Azerbaijan, was not an exclusion. It was accompanied by grave violations of international humanitarian law, tantamount to war crimes and crimes against humanity, in order to seed the panic among the civilian population of Azerbaijan. For this purpose, Armenia deliberately attacked the densely populated civilian settlements of Azerbaijan, located far from the conflict zone, as a result of which 101 civilians were killed, more than 400 seriously injured. There have also been undeniable facts depicting a number of human rights violations by Armenian servicemen against Azerbaijani captives, including acts of humiliation and ill treatment, such as physical assault, verbal abuse, executions through beheadings, and ill treatment of dead bodies. Azerbaijan is determined to take all measures stemming from its right under relevant bilateral and multilateral mechanisms to bring the perpetrators of those crimes to justice. Armenia, in an open attempt to cover up its above-mentioned wrongdoings, brazenly accuses Azerbaijan of the same, with a view to diverting the attention of the international community, and to that end carries out a massive campaign of fake news. UN human rights mechanism, including the OHCHR, treaty bodies and mandate holders have also been subjected by Armenia to its fake propaganda. The occupation of territories of Azerbaijan paves the way for hundreds of thousands of displaced persons to exercise their right to safe and dignified return to their places of origin. Yet, unprecedented magnitude of destruction of public and private property, critical civilian infrastructure, including educational and medical facilities, as well as historical and cultural heritage, and environment in the conflict-affected territories places a huge task ahead of the government of Azerbaijan in terms of rehabilitation and reconstruction of these territories. The government has already initiated practical steps in order to enable safe and dignified return of the displaced population and ensure peaceful coexistence within the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is resolute to reintegrate its citizens of Armenian region residing in the conflict-affected territories into its political, social, economic space, guaranteeing the same rights and freedoms with all the citizens of Azerbaijan, regardless of their ethnic, religious affiliation. The Constitution of the Republic of Azerbaijan provides the solid legal framework in this regard. Sustaining peace, rehabilitation and reconstruction activities, providing humanitarian assistance to those in need, including returning IDPs and refugees, should be absolute priority. To this end, Azerbaijan is ready to work with relevant international partners, including ICRC, UNHCR, and other UN agencies, as well as individual states willing to contribute to peace and stability in the region, in full compliance with the UN guiding principles on humanitarian assistance of 1991. Such an approach is based on international law, relevant resolutions and documents regulating UN's activities in the fields of humanitarian assistance, post-conflict rehabilitation and reconstruction, and will serve as a confidence-building measure aimed at healing the wounds of the conflict. The Israeli statement of 10 November 2020, signed by the leaders of Azerbaijan, Russia, and Armenia, commits both Armenia and Azerbaijan to cease all military activities while taking series of steps aiming at elimination of the decades-long conflict. Azerbaijan attaches vital importance to full implementation of this document, both in letter and spirit, and to healing the wounds of the bloody conflict on the basis of normalization of interstate relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It is our firm belief that the international community, led by the UN, has an important role to play in supporting implementation of the trilateral statement, which promises restoration of good neighborly relations in the region. Thank you.
شكرا. الآن شرفني أن أعطي الكلمة لمعالي إيريكسن سوريد وزيرة خارجية النرويج. معالي الوزيرة لك الكلمة.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. When we met in Geneva 1 year ago, we were only a few short weeks before our world changed. And since then, the pandemic has altered our way of life and challenged our fundamental freedoms in ways we never imagined. The health crisis has become a human rights crisis. And over the past year, we have seen governments use the pandemic as an excuse to concentrate power and to introduce restrictive and disproportionate measures. Freedom of the press has deteriorated, and in many countries, information about the spread of COVID-19 has been curtailed and censored. Violence and harmful practices against women and children have increased. All COVID-19 measures, including response and recovery efforts, must be based on human rights, fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law. They must be gender sensitive and non-discriminatory, and they must be part of a joint global effort and multilateral cooperation. Only then can we hope to succeed, all of us. President, the pandemic has highlighted the importance of the right to health, the right to education, and the right to information. Economic, social, cultural, civil, and political rights are interdependent and are all essential to build back better and fulfill the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm especially concerned about how the pandemic and government's mitigating measures have impacted children. School closures, lockdowns, movement restrictions, and a subsequent increase in domestic violence and abuse have seriously affected children's rights, health, and well-being. The weakening of protections for ethnic, religious, and sexual minorities is deeply concerning. President, According to Varieties of Democracy, 54% of the world's population now live in autocracies. And I'm deeply concerned about the backsliding of democracies around the world, a concern made stronger by the fact that it's also taking place on my own continent. Freedom of expression, of association and of assembly, as well as the rule of law, must be respected. Since we last met a year ago, we have seen people across the globe courageously defending these essential rights and defend democracy, even defying violent repression, and we commend their bravery. Human rights defenders and civil society's contribution to building free and prosperous societies must be recognized. We call on all states to enable and safeguard their work. President, for the third year in a row, we see the rule of law deteriorating globally. Where leaders seek to expand their own power at the expense of their peoples and institutions, they often first seek to undermine the judiciary and the media. An independent judiciary is an absolute prerequisite to safeguard fundamental human rights. Vibrant civil societies and a free and independent media uphold democracy and the rule of law. However, journalists and media workers are at risk of violence and persecution. Judges and lawyers are also experiencing reprisals and violence for defending and promoting the rule of law and respect for human rights. These are individuals that continue to take great risks, even to their own lives, to uphold the norms that we states have agreed on. I'm alarmed by this development and its consequences. For the individuals that are attacked and threatened, and for our societies at large, these are attacks on the norms that underpin free and democratic societies. President, it is regrettable that the past year we have spent more time defending existing human rights standards rather than developing and strengthening the normative framework. We must step up the national implementation and adherence to our human rights commitments. Norway will continue to build cross-regional alliances with other countries to prevent backsliding and the erosion of rights. The dedicated work and independence of the High Commissioner and her office is as important as ever. We have a common responsibility to make sure that the human rights pillar is sufficiently empowered and financed. Norway maintains our strong commitment to universal human rights and to those who defend them. Thank you.
Thank you. I have the honor now to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ernesto Henrique Fraga Arau, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Brazil, and Her Excellency Ms. Damares Alves, Minister of Women, Family and Human Rights of Brazil. Excellencies, you have the floor.
Senhora Presidente.
Madam President, Ambassador Nazat Shamim Khan, Madam High Commissioner, members of the Human Rights Council, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor for me to address you at this, the 46th session of the Human Rights Council of the United Nations, alongside my dear colleague, Minister Damares Alves, Minister of Women, Family and Human Rights. Brazil considers this council as a vital fora for sovereign nations to debate the most urgent human rights issues in the world. We believe the council is facing unprecedented challenges. The bases of international human rights law were laid by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, which clearly set out fundamental freedoms as being decisive for human dignity. Nevertheless, fundamental freedoms are facing growing challenges, and the COVID crisis has merely exacerbated this trend. Whole societies are getting used to the idea that freedom can be sacrificed on the altar of health. I'm not criticizing measures taken by so many countries of lockdown, but you cannot accept a lockdown of the human spirit, which basically depends on freedom and human rights in order to prosper. Thus, we reiterate our determination today to work alongside all nations for an international order which reflects the standards set in the Universal Declaration and other human rights treaties in the face of today's challenges. The major challenge we face today is what I would call techno-totalitarianism, blocking platforms and sites, controlling contents and information, legal rulings and laws which criminalize online activities, as well as the abusive or improper use of algorithms and the growing tide of internet control by different actors driven by economic and ideological aims. This has to be curtailed. Information and communication technology brought us the promise of new platforms for freedom of expression, easier and broader access to information, but these technologies are being increasingly subjected to censorship, monitoring and social policing. Any technology brings the potential for freedom, creativity and well-being, but at the same time has a destructive potential. Throughout the human venture, since the discovery of fire to nuclear power, the challenge of each age has been to incorporate new technology for the good of humanity. The 21st century is the century of information technology, artificial intelligence, and our task is to ensure these technologies can free and enrich the human being on the basis of its intrinsic dignity and not to subdue or dumb down human beings, transforming each man and woman into a simple set of data to be exploited. We have the power to ensure that technology works in favour and not against human rights, democracy and the rule of law. In a spirit of openness and dialogue, Brazil calls upon all to urgently and deeply debate the subject of freedom of expression in the face of new technology. This is a debate that could be remembered by future generations as the great debate of our time. And we call for new instruments to be established which ensure that humanity can make a technological leap forward and without falling in the abyss of self-destruction. I give the floor to Minister Damares Alves. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to address the Human Rights Council. COVID-19 placed huge challenges in the area of human rights, particularly for the most vulnerable. In order to tackle this situation, the Brazilian government presented a number of contingency plans in the areas of health, social protection and protecting the economy. The aim was to address the needs of older persons, persons living in street situations, persons with disabilities, families in vulnerable urban areas, as well as traditional peoples and communities, indigenous communities, quilombolas, the descendants of slaves, and other isolated peoples, for example, have received over 700,000 food baskets so that they could remain far from outbreaks of the virus. We're also taking care not just of the Amazon forest, but above all its people. There are almost 30 million people living in this region now. With the Embrace Marajó program, we're going to invest over $900 million between now and 2023. Embrace Marajó is our new sustainable development model for the Amazon, focusing on protecting the forest and, above all, those who live in it. We've created a new national policy for searching for disappeared persons, with the launch of a new national register of disappeared persons. The aim of this is to implement the Amber Alert throughout the country. When it comes to defending women's rights, in 2020, the Brazilian government budget was the largest of the past 5 years and was 5 times bigger than that of 2018. Brazil has made public policies and initiatives focusing on children and young people a priority. We have equipped over 500 guardianship councils which work at the front line in defending children and adolescents who are the victims of violence. Protecting older persons is also a priority for Brazil. There was an unprecedented initiative in 2020 in which we distributed over $30 million of funding to over 2,900 long-term care institutions in order to ensure that people had safe housing during the pandemic. In December of last year, we launched a huge police operation which received over 13,000 reports of violence against older persons throughout the country. This resulted in over 3,000 criminal investigations being launched. This year, we have achieved our priority of vaccinating older persons along with health professionals and traditional peoples. To conclude, I wish to reiterate that Brazil remains steadfast in its defence of democracy, freedom, the family, and life from the moment of conception. We shall continue to work with this Council in promoting human rights for all. In Brazil and anywhere in the world, let nobody be left behind.
Shukran. I have the floor to His Excellency Mr. Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Turkey. Excellency, you have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, we left behind a historically difficult year. COVID-19 showed how vulnerable and interdependent we are. We need a renewed commitment to multilateralism. And human rights-based approach is the essential in responding to the pandemic. We should give attention to the needs of vulnerable groups, including women, children, elderly, migrants, refugees, and persons deprived of their liberty. Equitable and affordable access to vaccines, medicines, and medical equipment is essential. These are the principles behind our global assistance efforts and our provision of free healthcare to all at home. Indeed, we assisted 157 countries and 12 international organizations in their efforts against the pandemic. And in Turkey, we provide free treatment and vaccination for COVID-19 to all, including migrants and refugees. Ladies and gentlemen, the promotion and protection of human rights remain a top priority for our government. Over the last 2 decades, we have undertaken significant reforms. Obviously, there is always room for improvement. Despite threats by multiple terror organizations, our commitment to human rights, democracy, and rule of law remains firm. Judicial reform strategy and the 3 legislative amendment packages adopted last year, as well as the Human Rights Action Plan to be announced soon, are concrete examples. Excellencies, let me share our views on some major issues where human rights and dignity are at stake. Xenophobia, racism, Islamophobia, and hate speech are on the rise. The pandemic further increased these dangerous trends. Offensive publications and hate speech against Islam and Muslims insult nearly 2 billion believers around the world. Yes, freedom of speech is key to any democracy, but this freedom doesn't give the right to insult the sacred values of others. Unless we promote a culture of living together, we risk damaging our common democratic values and social cohesion. Terrorism remains one of the leading global threats targeting human lives. Just recently, PKK terrorist organization murdered 13 innocent lives in northern Iraq, and the world is silent again. Without international solidarity and with the current double standards, we cannot eradicate this threat. Having lost innocent lives to various terror groups, including the PKK, YPG, Daesh, and FETÖ, we know well that terror has no specific ideology. In Syria, people continue to suffer from the ongoing military offensives by regime forces and terrorist attacks. In addition to 3.7 million Syrians under temporary protection in Turkey, we contribute directly to the safety and well-being of 5 million civilians in northern Syria. Turkey is the only corridor for UN cross-border humanitarian aid to Syria, and even this corridor is under attack. It is essential to maintain this assistance. As the largest refugee hosting country in the world, we uphold our international obligations as well as the human rights and dignity of the people we are hosting. However, we are deeply concerned by the persistent practice of pushbacks occurring before the eyes of the European Union and Frontex. Israel continues to act with absolute impunity in the occupied Palestinian territories. The inhumane blockade in Gaza and expansion of illegal settlements by Israel remain a violation of human rights. Turkey will continue to support the legitimate quest of Palestinians for an independent and sovereign state of Palestine based on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. In Libya, each day, new mass graves are discovered in Tarhuna. Human Rights Council should contribute to bringing the perpetrators to justice. Although they made every effort towards a settlement, the Turkish Cypriots continue to suffer inhumane embargoes and unjust isolation. Despite these pressures, the Turkish Cypriots have their state, which functions as a vibrant democracy. In Nagorno-Karabakh, there is now a historic opportunity for a sustainable peace. We will continue to support initiatives for peace and prosperity in the South Caucasus based on regional ownership. And we hope that Armenia chooses to be a partner of peace. Turkey will reciprocate any positive steps taken by Armenia. We will also continue to support the peaceful resolution of the Abkhazia and South Ossetia conflicts while ensuring the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Georgia. Turkey supports Ukraine's territorial integrity, including Crimea. We will continue to support Crimean Tatars' aspirations to live freely and safely in their historical homeland. Turkey closely follows the human rights situation in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. The findings of the UN and other international reports are cause for concern. We share our concerns and expectations on the matter with the Chinese authorities. We expect transparency on this issue. While respecting China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, Turkey underlines the importance of protecting the human rights of Uyghur Turks and other Muslims. We continue to follow the developments regarding the possible visit of the High Commissioner's team to the region, and upon China's invitation, we will also send our own national team to visit the region. We reiterate our call to the Indian government to ease the current restrictions in Jammu Kashmir. We wish for the resolution of the issue through peaceful means on the basis of relevant UN resolutions and the legitimate expectations of the people of Jammu Kashmir. Human rights violations in Myanmar, especially crimes committed against Rohingya, remain a source of concern. We also condemn the military takeover of the government by the Myanmar armed forces. Madam President, Turkey will continue to engage with the Council for the protection and promotion of human rights for all. Thank you.
Shukran. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, this was the last speaker on my list for this meeting. We will now have a short technical break and reconvene in a few minutes to continue with the high-level segment. I hereby close the second meeting of the 46th session of the Human Rights Council.
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I hereby declare open the third meeting of the 46th session of the Human Rights Council. Before we resume the list of speakers, I wish to inform you of a slight change of our program of work today. In order for us to accommodate the full list of dignitaries scheduled for this afternoon, we will continue the high-level segment until we conclude today's list of speakers, which we anticipate will proceed until approximately 4:45 p.m. The annual high-level panel discussion on human rights mainstreaming would then begin immediately thereafter. On behalf of the Council, I wish to express my sincere gratitude to UNOC and especially to the interpreters for their flexibility and willingness to stay with us for some extra time today. We will now continue with the high-level segment. I have the honor to give the floor to Her Excellency Maria Ubach-Font, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Andorra. Excellency, you have the floor.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, Secretary General, High Commissioner for Human Rights, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to be before you representing the Principality of Andorra at this 46th session of the Human Rights Council, and to do so despite the exceptional circumstances that we have been going through for more than a year now. We celebrate this year the 20th anniversary of the Durban Declaration Against Racism and Discrimination. That anniversary serves as a reminder of the urgent need to fulfill the commitments and engagements that we adopted in 2001. The COVID-19 crisis has exacerbated existing inequalities in our societies and has pushed off course our movement towards achieving the 2030 agenda. It's for this reason that Andorra is in favor of the adoption of clear measures both at the national and international level to bring us back on track. We have been a country of immigration since the second half of the 20th century. To facilitate integration and to prevent discrimination of different peoples, cultures and nationalities who have come to settle in our territory, we have focused in particular on our educational system. The fruits of this policy have proven to be very positive because we have noted strong degrees of social cohesion between Andorran citizens and those who are descendants of immigrants. And I would point out that Andorrans, native-born Andorrans, only represent 50% of our population today. We guarantee high-quality education for all, and we believe that that is crucial for enriching and harmonious coexistence. Education is, without a shadow of a doubt, a key component of social cohesion and consolidation. It's a vital element for a respectful society and a society that stands shoulder to shoulder with all of its citizens. The government of our country is determined to maintain the quality of education throughout the pandemic. In order to do so, we needed to be inventive and to roll out initiatives such as e-learning and the provision of e-material to all families who express the need. The small size of our country allowed the government to prioritize a personalized approach tailored to the difficulties and challenges faced by each pupil. We proposed that to low-income families that we would pay for internet access fees so that all children could follow remote learning throughout the lockdown period. I am firmly persuaded that access to education for all will contribute over the midterm to the reduction of inequalities, which will position us better to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 10, the reduction of inequalities. This firm belief is also reflected in our determination to pursue cooperation for development, focusing on quality education for all, particularly girls, and the vocational training and later life training of women. I would add to that for about a decade now, Andorra has at the national and European level, particularly within the European Council, been doing all that it can to champion education for a democratic citizenship. President, it seems to us also that it's indispensable to bring civil society on board as partners in initiatives aimed at tackling and weeding out discrimination. Such collaboration or partnership will allow for a better understanding and a better acceptance of measures taken, and would also provide legislators with a better understanding of the sheer scope and magnitude of discrimination that may exist in a society. Bringing civil society on board allows us to shed light on unsuspected inequalities and discrimination, including those that have not been reported to the authorities. In that understanding, the government of Andorra and NGOs have been working shoulder to shoulder to draft in 2019 a law on equality and non-discrimination. The purpose of that law is the rollout of a framework of measures and public policies actions aimed at preventing, eliminating and correcting, as well as compensating for discrimination. A draft law for de facto gender equality will be submitted to Parliament for its adoption in the coming weeks. A Secretariat of State for Citizen Equality and Participation that depends directly upon the head of government or reports directly to them was set up at the beginning of 2019. On the 19th of February 2020, we set up an equality observatory, which is intended to be a body for very specific data gathering, particularly data on failure to uphold equality. President, the pandemic has exacerbated certain facets of discrimination and has had a very prejudicial effect on inter-family or interpersonal violence, in particular violence against children and women. The different lockdowns to which our societies have been subject have multiplied the risks faced by victims. Maltreatment of children and gender-based violence are scourges that affect all societies, irrespective of social class, origin, culture or background. In order to respond to the emergency situation and the fact that we've seen greater levels of such interpersonal violence through the lockdown, we have decided to ramp up the aid and support that we provide to victims. To protect victims, we have diversified our solutions of social assistance, psychological and legal support, and refuges or shelters. Gender equality is a topic that has long been on our agenda and one that we addressed during our UPR process, UPR outcome document that should be adopted during this 46th session of the Human Rights Council. We have limited human resources as a small country. Nonetheless, we strive to do all that we can to live up to all of our international commitments and undertakings. Moreover, our national legislation systematically takes into account evolution and changes at the international level when it comes to human rights protection and promotion so that we can domesticate them. I'd like to reiterate publicly our full support for all of the review and oversight mechanisms which act to ensure that human rights are enjoyed and upheld, as well as fundamental freedoms, whilst systematically and simultaneously upholding the international commitments of states. All of this has a direct impact on the life of our citizens. It underscores the importance of multilateralism when it comes to the promotion and protection of human rights and to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda. We could not do this alone. Thank you very much.
I thank you very much, and I have the honor to give the floor now to Mr. Rodolfo, His Excellency Mr. Rodolfo Solano Quiros, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Worship of Costa Rica.
Estimada señora.
Distinguished Madam President, Secretary General, High Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. It is for Costa Rica an honor and indeed most welcome that we are able to hold this opening of the first annual session of the Human Rights Council in a global context that has been completely set on its head and which is reflective, we believe, of the never-before-seen challenges that we are facing as a common human family. And these are challenges linked to the pandemic as well as to pre-existing challenges and dilemmas linked to persistent inequality and challenges in the fields of sustainable development, democracy and human rights. As countries undertake efforts to adapt to the new reality that has emerged as a result of the pandemic, and in our eagerness to restore our economies, Costa Rica believes that unfettered recognition of all human rights, their protection and their oversight should continue to be a priority when it comes to action. And it is in that understanding that we believe that the sessions and meetings of the Human Rights Council, should serve as vital spaces for championing global responses to the current health, economic and environmental crises. We need to redouble our efforts to ensure a brighter future for all our people without any discrimination and without leaving anyone behind. As far as my country is concerned, it is vital that we pursue progress on all fronts and under all the different agenda items from a human rights-based focus. This will entail full buy-in to the Sustainable Development Goals. It will also imply measures to deal with the climate crisis, and we will also need, if we're to pursue everything through a human rights lens, to ensure an effective response to the health crisis, which will guarantee fair access to anti-COVID-19 vaccines and treatment. Madam President, Costa Rica is this year celebrating the bicentenary of its independence. Historically speaking, we have done all that we can to leave a positive and constructive mark on the global agenda, promoting dialogue on the basis of a culture of human rights, peace, development and sustainability. Today, as I address you all, I would like to highlight 3 areas which are of particular interest in our view for the discussions going forward of this Human Rights Council. Firstly, our commitment to the environment and to those rights related to the enjoyment of a clean and healthy environment. This commitment leads us to believe that the discussions on the right to a safe, clean, healthy and sustainable environment must be given fresh impetus and a higher profile throughout the United Nations system. More than 155 countries already recognize this right, alive to the fact that the link between the reduction in quality of life, high levels of pollution, and the impact of climate change represents a latent and potentially irreversible threat to humankind. Costa Rica believes, moreover, that this legal recognition of the right to a safe and healthy environment is a key element of national and global action aimed at environmental protection. By the same token, aware of the degradation in levels of diversity at the global level and the repercussions of this worrying drop-off, Costa Rica has been co-leading, together with France, the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People initiative, which seeks to increase protected and conserved areas around the planet to cover 30% of the world surface by 2030. I turn now to the second area of interest that we'd like to bring to your attention: the right to the highest possible level of health. With more than 70 years of guaranteeing universal health coverage under our belt, Costa Rica is a staunch promoter of this right. For this reason, we have actively promoted fair access to treatment and technology to save lives through the call for our solidarity and the CTAP platform, which has been drafted and rolled out jointly with the World Health Organization and a further 40 states. The CTAP, or COVID-19 Technology Access Portal, has been conceived to accelerate the development and manufacture of the necessary technologies for the prevention, detection and treatment of COVID-19, and has the potential to be a major boost and help in future health threats. Moreover, in a drive to contribute to solidarity and cooperation, which we believe is sine qua non for the protection of the right to life and health of all persons around the world, my country acceded to the COVAX facility mechanism. We did so because we are firmly convinced that it is our duty and responsibility to guarantee equitable access to vaccines in all regions of the world, and this council should serve as a body to oversee and ensure that that is indeed happening. Thirdly, and lastly, but no less importantly, we believe it's important to ramp up our efforts to leave nobody behind. My country defends and promotes the participation of Afro-descendant persons, of young people, of persons with disabilities, of indigenous peoples, of the LGBTI population, and of those populations that are on the move around our busy and turbulent world, migrants and refugees. We are convinced that global efforts to dismantle structural barriers that limit or infringe upon the dignity of these persons and the full exercise of their rights will require inclusive, honest and self-critical dialogue accompanied by effective, tangible measures. Recovery and reconstruction must be used as an opportunity to combat social inequalities, particularly poverty and gender inequality. The gaps and shortfalls that prevent girls and women from exercising their rights on an equal footing and which expose them to violence and abuse need to disappear as a matter of urgency. As a global community, we have a moral duty to promote equality, to eradicate discrimination, and to protect the life and physical integrity and well-being of all women. Ladies and gentlemen, All of these points that we have raised with you are, we believe, not just reflective of the need to adapt to a new reality and build back better, but we also believe that they represent the very values and pillars of our foreign policy as Costa Rica. They are reflective of our fervent and unwavering commitment to international human rights law and to the Sustainable Development Agenda. On the basis of all the aforementioned, I would like to reiterate before you all Costa Rica's commitment to the universal human rights system. And with a great deal of enthusiasm and excitement, I bring to your attention Costa Rica's candidature to membership of the Human Rights Council for the period 2023-2026. It would be a great honor for my country to take up this post, and it would be one that we would assume with the greatest sense of humility and responsibility. In closing, I would like to underscore the importance of keeping a very close eye on those situations and issues that come before this Council, particularly this session, and the need to break down the structural bottlenecks that confront us and that prevent us from working the way that we should. I thank you all.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
I would like to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Sam Kutesa, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Uganda.
Madam President, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I congratulate Ambassador Nazat Shamema Khan upon your election as President of the Human Rights Council. It is my great pleasure and honor to address this 46th session of the Human Rights Council. This session is taking place amidst the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, which has impacted our lives greatly and changed the way we work. This Council has rightly and consistently called for the global protection of the rights and most vulnerable members of our societies. The same principled approach must be employed for the protection of those highest at risk from suffering severe disease and COVID death from COVID-19 in all parts of the world. Uganda joins the call for equitable distribution of the vaccines and commends the countries supporting the COVAX facility. The protection and promotion of human rights are respected as enshrined in our Constitution. For the past 35 years, the government of Uganda has resolutely pursued democratic development in Uganda with the promotion and protection of human rights as a central pillar of governance. It is because of our firm belief that it is important for our country and people. Through the deliberate actions of government, a strong and robust legal framework for the promotion and protection of human rights was established in Uganda. The implementation of these laws is supported by independent institutions such as the Uganda Human Rights Commission and the Equal Opportunities Commission. The government's human rights approach to governance is reflected in our National Development Plan, which is the main policy tool for the Executive, Parliament, and the Judiciary. Madam President, I am happy to inform this Council that despite the pandemic, general elections were held successfully in Uganda from 14th of January 2021 to 3rd February 2021. Since the outbreak of the pandemic, the government of Uganda in its approach prioritizes the protection of human life, since without right to life, it is impossible to enjoy other rights. To ensure that the country responded adequately and mitigated the impact of the pandemic, the government, through the Ministry of Health, developed guidelines and standard operating procedures to align and standardize its response to prevent and curb the spread of COVID-19. All candidates were urged to comply with the SOPs and frequently reminded to adhere to them. However, the conduct of some of the presidential candidates and their supporters from the very first day of presidential nomination on 2nd and 3rd of November was open defiance to these measures. One of these presidential candidates repeatedly and willfully breached the SOPs, organizing mass rallies, while putting the lives of people at risk in the midst of the pandemic. As a result of this open defiance, he was arrested by the police on 18th November. This arrest was followed by premeditated violent riots, during which regrettably led to the loss of about 54 of their lives. First with the rioters armed with clubs, fire bombs, rocks, Hamas threatened to cause grievous harm to the public and security personnel, law enforcement agencies took action to protect the public against violence, crime, and other harmful acts. No country would countenance such a state of lawlessness and lawless behavior. These resulted in the arrest of a number of suspects. Some were charged in courts of law and released on court bail or police bond, while others were remanded in prison. An investigation into each of the deaths is ongoing to ensure accountability, and anyone found culpable for loss of innocent life will be held accountable. Let me emphasize that the law enforcement agencies of the Republic of Uganda recognize the sanctity of life and have always upheld human rights in the execution of their constitutional duties. The government regrets the unfortunate loss of lives and has extended condolences to the families who lost loved ones. Ugandans have chosen to exercise their liberty to resolve their political disputes through functional national institutions established by law for that purpose. Unfortunately, some of the political leaders who lost in the election continued thereafter making inflammatory statements aimed at inciting people to violence. The government urged them to desist from making such statements, and if they felt aggrieved, seek peaceful and lawful means of redress. Uganda strongly believes that the media is an important part of a democratic society and is essential to the protection of human rights, fundamental freedoms, and socio-economic transformation. We also believe that people need free media to provide them with accurate information and informed analysis, and also hold government to account. However, during the recently held elections, some individuals and groups began using social media platforms as a tool to distribute their vile messages, incubating their hate online and encouraging it to spread. This is why, when severity and viciousness became apparent, the government decided to temporarily shut down the internet. This was a necessary step to stop vitriolic language and incitement to violence, which was a threat to our democratic process and the security of the country and its citizens. The internet has since been reinstated. I'm pleased to inform the Council that notwithstanding the COVID-19 pandemic, the government ensured favorable space for free, fair, and peaceful and inclusive election at presidential, parliamentary, and local government levels to canvass support from the electorate. As government, we are proud of the historic milestone achieved in these elections to have Ugandans all around the country come out in large numbers to freely and peacefully express their democratic right. Madam President, this year marks the 20th anniversary of the Durban Declaration and program of action as an opportune time for all of us to reflect on our national and collective strategies employed in addressing racism, xenophobia, racial discrimination, and other forms of intolerance. Success against this pandemic will require addressing systemic racism and other forms of discrimination, including against migrant workers, asylum seekers, and refugees. National and international systems that make some sections of society more vulnerable to disease than others have been proven to fuel the pandemic. We call upon the Council to focus equally on the protection of human rights that affect the daily lives of ordinary people seeking to obtain basic needs such as food, shelter, and decent work. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's now my pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Buja Osmani, Minister for Foreign Affairs of North Macedonia. You have the floor.
Madam President, Madam High Commissioner, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased and honored to address for the first time the high-level segment of the Human Rights Council. The Council's work and its mechanisms are critical for timely addressing the challenges to the fundamental human rights and freedoms, nationally and globally. Its activities have become even more important with the COVID-19 crisis and its implications to the enjoyment of human rights across the globe. The COVID-19 has had serious consequences in the Republic of North Macedonia, both in terms of health and economy. The government adopted 4 packages of measures in order to mitigate the consequences of the crisis caused by the pandemic, including financial assistance to the poorest categories of citizens. The 5th package of measures is about to be adopted, which will be directed towards economic recovery and helping the most vulnerable economic sectors in the country. Politically, despite the challenge of the pandemic, the Republic of North Macedonia in July 2020 conducted early parliamentary election that OSCE and the international community assessed as fair and democratic, which in turn largely speaks of the degree of awareness and democracy in our society. On the other hand, measures are continuously taken to strengthen the legislation regarding the independence of the judiciary, guaranteeing gender equality, prevent and sanction any form of violence, including gender-based. Undoubtedly, tackling corruption remains a serious challenge, to which the government remains consistently committed and will continue its enhanced effort by drafting a 2020-2024 corruption prevention national strategy in order to have accountability, transparency and responsibility. Regarding the increase of cases of hate speech and discrimination in accordance with the upward trend of spreading it through social media, measures are taken to solve the cases, to sanction the perpetrators, as well as to raise public awareness of the need to respect diversity on all grounds. In that context, the establishment of the Commission for Protection Against Discrimination and appointment of its members in late January 2021 represents a positive step. Regarding the impact of the pandemic on the freedom of the media and expression, the government continuously takes measures to guarantee conditions for professional and independent action by journalists and media workers. By undertaking specific activities and measures by the Agency for Audio and Audiovisual Media Services and the Association of Journalists of Macedonia, guidelines for safe and professional reporting on the incidence of the coronavirus have been defined, which at the same time offer practical guidance for professionalism and guaranteeing the protection and safety of media workers. In addition to all the efforts to improve the human rights situation at the national level, the Republic of North Macedonia remains consistent with the efforts for active participation and cooperation with international organizations and initiatives at the global level. In this context, we have put forward our candidacy for the Human Rights Council membership for the 2025-2027 period. North Macedonia remains determined to contribute further to the effective implementation of the Human Rights Council's mission for protection, promotion, and advancement of fundamental human rights and freedoms. Ladies and gentlemen, while the world faces serious challenges that affect all of us, we witness ongoing conflicts and tensions that in many countries around the world still prevent the enjoyment of human rights and cause serious suffering to the civilian population, some of which are crimes against humanity and call for international accountability of the perpetrators. Furthermore, the exposure to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and ongoing challenges that question the enjoyment and fulfillment of fundamental human rights and freedoms have reaffirmed the need to strengthen the common mutual cooperation and coordination of the international community as a whole. All of this has reconfirmed the call for more multilateralism as a basic driver in the protection and promotion of fundamental human rights and freedoms. We can successfully prevent the erosion of the fundamental principles of humanity, solidarity, and humanness only by advocating for the adoption and implementation of measures that will basically focus on the human dimension. To this end, by joint efforts, let us continue to implement Agenda 2030 and the implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, fighting for gender equality, reducing growing inequalities, mitigating the effects of climate change, assuring sustainable development and sanctioning any form of discrimination by enabling equal enjoyment of fundamental human rights and freedoms by every individual. Let me conclude with a quote from the statement by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Ms. Bachelet. Like the climate emergency, COVID-19 reminds us that we are bound together as one humanity. We must act. Working together, we can recover better. With strong solidarity, we can build a world that is more resilient, sustainable, and just. End of quote. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Et maintenant, j'ai l'honneur de donner la parole.
It's a great honor to give the floor to Her Excellency Madame Louise Moshike-Wabo, who is the Secretary General of Francophonie. You have the floor, Madam. Madam High Commissioner, Madam President of the Human Rights Council, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is both the first time and also an honor for me in my capacity as Secretary General of Francophonie to participate in the work of the Human Rights Council on the occasion of this high-level segment during the 46th session. Francophonie encompasses 88 states and governments who are present across 5 continents. They constitute a community of sharing a language, French, but also sharing values, first and foremost those of solidarity. Solidarity which can be seen in the mobilization of our organization to help the most vulnerable populations and countries. Solidarity which is materialized through constant dialogue, demanding but always respectful dialogue, so that we can further peace, democracy, rights and freedoms in the Francophone space. Francophonie celebrated its 50th anniversary last year. It's deeply committed to promoting rights and freedoms. This is a mandate entrusted to us by member states who adopted in November 2000 the Bamako Declaration. This declaration is the normative and reference text of our organization. It sets out our action in the area of promoting and upholding democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. Progress has been made over the last decades, but we also have to collectively recognize the fact that the struggle for human rights and fundamental freedoms is still urgently topical. The work carried out by the Office of High Commissioner of Human Rights, as well as Human Rights Council, is absolutely vital. The work based on dialogue and cooperation helps prevent human rights violations and ensure that these rights are protected. Francophonie has also ensured that upholding human rights be one of its main areas of intervention in these countries. Quite apart from the constant advocacy that we carry out in order to encourage ratification and upholding of international instruments on the part of our member states, in addition to that, we are working on the ground close to national players. We are particularly working to protect the rights of women and children. We're working to promote freedom of expression, but also combating this global scourge, which is disinformation. We're supporting also our states to improve birth registration and systematize civil registration records so that individuals are able to have access to all their rights: right to education, right to health, and voting rights, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, the economic, social, humanitarian, political, and security effects of this long health crisis are considerable. Given this context of uncertainty and vulnerabilities, we have to redouble our vigilance and commitment so that rights and freedoms of our peoples do not recede. The health crisis has exacerbated further these inequalities in terms of access to care, access to education or employment. Those populations who were already vulnerable are the first victims of this crisis. First and foremost, women as well as children. With this health crisis, domestic violence has shot up. This pandemic is also something that has revealed and also accelerated the crisis that multilateralism has been facing for years now. It has strengthened real questions regarding the actual performance of the multilateral system. However, this crisis has also revealed increased need to have international cooperation. Ever since its creation, the International Organization of Francophonie is an active partner with the UN in these three areas of action: peace, security, development, and human rights. The partnership agreement that we concluded in 1997 with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has allowed us to carry out on the ground about 40 projects affecting both civil and political rights and also economic, social and cultural rights. This partnership, which was renewed in 2020, and Madam High Commissioner, I'm very pleased that it was, is going to allow us to, this year, carry out further actions in two priority areas. On the one hand, consolidating the Universal Periodic Review mechanism by supporting our states in that regard, and on the other hand, strengthening national human rights institutions in the Francophone area, particularly in the area of monitoring and respecting rights and freedoms during electoral processes. Through our joint actions, we are giving real substance to multilateralism built on solidarity, serving our populations, and in a position to ensure protection of their rights. This renewed multilateralism has to be truly representative of the diversity of its members and diverse realities. In order to achieve this, it's vital that we ensure respect for multilingualism within international fora in order to achieve effective, equitable and informed participation of everyone in debates and decisions. And in that regard, and this will be my conclusion, I would like to pay tribute to the decisive role of the group of Francophone ambassadors in Geneva and globally who have been particularly active within your assembly. Many thanks.
Je vous remercie, and I will give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Marta Delgado Peralta, Vice Minister of Multilateral Affairs and Human Rights of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico. You have the floor.
Thank you. And I'd like to extend greetings to my colleagues representing various states participating in the high-level segment during this 46th session of the Human Rights Council. This pandemic has thrown up many challenges to our countries. It's also generated limits on the exercise of rights. That is why we have taken up our international activism, supporting multilateralism as a way of addressing shared problems facing nations. We believe that the gaps in equalities have only been exacerbated because of this pandemic. The global response to the pandemic will only be effective if it shows solidarity between states. We have to guarantee access to health without any discrimination, including discrimination based on ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic situation, disabilities, or your migratory situation. We will only be safe when we're all safe, and that means we need to strengthen international cooperation to ensure in an equitable fashion global access to medicines, medical equipment, vaccinations. At the same time, there mustn't be monopolistic practices, indeed speculatory activities which exacerbate vulnerabilities for our peoples, hampering the recovery. And that is why Mexico is promoting a vision in the UN General Assembly through a resolution which was co-sponsored by 179 states April last, and indeed in other fora such as the G20, WHO, and this Council. The only effective response to the pandemic is one that gives you a gender perspective, one that addresses issues in a differentiated fashion and see how the health crisis has really affected women and girls, its exacerbated forms of violence and pre-existing forms of violence and discrimination, deeply rooted in patriarchal systems in the political area as well as the social arena. That is why a year ago we have adopted a really feminist foreign affairs approach. We are the first country in the Global South to do this from our Foreign Affairs Ministry. A two-pronged goal, that the gender perspective be at the heart of our foreign affairs policy. And this means that we'll be able slowly to ensure that is mainstreamed in public policies with our country. We have to also recognise the contribution of women to foreign affairs policy. It's very important. Mexico's work in this area has also been vital to bring about changes that will bring about changes in turn to Mexican society. We've seen this. It's a real demand in our elections that we've seen in the past. In the past year, and despite the difficulties thrown up by the pandemic, particularly when it comes to carrying out our public duties, Mexico submitted 3 reports to the treaty bodies, and we've also had a fluid dialogue with the special procedures, particularly when it comes to communications and scheduling visits that had been previously agreed upon. I would also like to highlight the international work done by the Foreign Affairs Ministry and the leadership shown. We have acceded to 5 important instruments in the field of human rights, including the ratification of the regional agreement, known as the Escazun Agreement, and also recognizing the competence of the Committee on Enforced Disappearances to be apprised of individual communications. This dovetails with our openness policy. Our Foreign Affairs Ministry recognizes the challenges also that we have in the area of human rights, that we need to defend those who are at the forefront, the front line defending human rights and ensuring non-discrimination. Traditionally, we have actively participated in the work of this council and will continue to do that, analysing the issues that have to be discussed, initiatives submitted based on their merits and how far they align with international human rights law and also constitutional principles. Mexico will continue to promote measures that contribute to preventing the violation of human rights, that really promote a progressive agenda to protect the rights of specific groups, enabling access of victims to justice. In that regard, we recognise that this council is the fora to discuss these issues of concern in the human rights field, and particularly to identify best practices, as well as cooperation, which allows us to move ahead to achieve these joint goals. We will also be deploying all our efforts to ensure that Council continues to work effectively and efficiently. It is a fundamental key, an element of the multilateral system. It offers justice and dignity for millions of people worldwide. I wish you every success in your work in Council, and many thanks for your attention.
Muchas gracias. And I now have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Wang Yi, State Councillor and Minister for Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China. Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. Vice President, colleagues, it gives me great pleasure to speak at the 46th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council on behalf of the Chinese government. At this moment, humanity is still in tough battle with COVID-19. The coronavirus is our common enemy. Defeating the virus is our mission. Solidarity and cooperation is our only option. The pandemic has afflicted calamitous impact on humankind. To date, COVID-19 has infected over 100 million people, claimed over 2 million lives, pushed 130 million people back into poverty. Global inequality is exacerbated, North-South divide is widened, and the right to development is faced with new challenges. At the same time, racism and xenophobia are resurfacing, disinformation and hate speech are spreading. Certain countries are obsessed with politicizing the virus and stigmatizing other nations. Legitimate demand by developing countries for vaccines is not getting adequate attention, and their need is not met. How to promote and protect human rights in the face of these unprecedented changes around the world and this once-in-a-century pandemic, it is a big question that must be answered with deep reflection. China holds the following views. First, we should embrace a human rights philosophy that centers on the people. The people are the human rights all about. The people's interests are where the human rights cause starts and ends. Increasing people's sense of gains, happiness, and security is the fundamental pursuit of human rights, as well as the ultimate goal of national governance. The people-centered philosophy means the people should be the real masters of their country, and they should take part in national governance and political consultation. It also means the wealth gap should be narrowed and all-round development of the people should be promoted. Second, we should uphold both universality and particularity of human rights. Peace, development, equity, justice, democracy, and freedom are common values shared by all humanity and recognized by all countries. The UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights have set out lofty ideals and basic principles for advancing human rights. They should be observed and developed by all countries. On the other hand, countries differ from each other in history, culture, social system, and level of economic and social development. Therefore, they must promote and protect human rights in light of their national realities and the needs of the people. Third, we should systematically advance all aspects of human rights. Human rights are an all-encompassing concept. They include civil political rights as well as economic and social cultural rights. Among them, the rights to subsistence and development are the basic human rights of paramount importance. We should take coordinated, integrated, multi-pronged steps to advance all aspects of human rights in all dimensions and fields throughout the whole process. The scope of human rights is constantly evolving. The right to health and the environmental right should also be given more prominence. Fourth, we should continue to promote international dialogue and cooperation on human rights. Promoting human rights is a common cause for us all. Global human rights governance should be advanced through consultation among all countries, and the benefits of human rights progress should be shared by all people of all countries. Human rights are not a monopoly by a small number of countries. Still less should be used as a tool to pressure other countries and meddle in their internal affairs. All countries should abide by the purpose and principles of the UN Charter, carry out human rights exchange and cooperation on the basis of equality and mutual respect, and jointly promote the sound development of the international human rights cause. Colleagues, this year is extremely important for China. We will celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China, CPC, and start the new journey toward fully building a modern socialist country. Under the CPC's leadership, we have embarked on the path of socialism with Chinese characteristics, which is widely endorsed by our people, and found the path of human rights development that suits China's national conditions and needs. With all rural residents living below the current poverty line lifted out of poverty, we have met the target of eradicating extreme poverty set out in the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development 10 years ahead of schedule, thus turning into reality the Chinese nation's dreams of thousands of years. It is a milestone in our human rights achievement. China's poverty eradication is not just about higher income and living standards. More importantly, it is also about ensuring everyone's rights to education, healthcare, and housing. China has put in place the world's largest social security system covering elderly care, healthcare, subsistence allowance, and housing. With its GDP exceeding 100 trillion RMB yuan and long-term social stability, China has laid a solid foundation for advancing its human rights cause. Faced with the sudden onslaught of COVID-19, the Chinese government has followed the people-first approach, put the safety and health of every person front and center, and made every effort to safeguard the life and dignity of the people. We also launched a global emergency humanitarian campaign, the largest of its kind since the founding of New China, to extending a helping hand to the countries and international organizations in need. It was one of our concrete steps to honor our commitment to building a global community of health for all. Vaccine concerns the rights to health, subsistence, and development of people, hence the priority of our current endeavors. Global distribution of vaccines must be fair and, in particular, accessible and affordable to developing countries. As the first country to pledge make vaccines a global public good, notwithstanding difficulties at home, China is providing free vaccines to 53 countries in need and exporting vaccines to 22 countries who have made purchasing requests. The overwhelming majority of these countries are developing countries. We hope that all countries that have the capacity will join hands and make due contributions. Colleagues, China supports more exchange and cooperation on human rights in the principle of mutual respect. We oppose using double standards to make slanderous attacks on other countries, and we also oppose using human rights as an excuse to interfere in other countries' internal affairs. Xinjiang-related issues are in essence about countering violent terrorism and separatism. The Xinjiang region of China has been earnestly implementing the UN Plan of Action to prevent violent extremism, drawing on other similar practices of other countries and taking de-radicalizing measures in accordance with law. All this is fully consistent with the principles and spirit of the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy. Thanks to the efforts of local people of all ethnic groups, there has been no violent terrorist case for more than 4 years in a row in Xinjiang. The region now enjoys social stability and sound development momentum. The local people are living a safe and happy life. Between 2010 and 2018, the Uyghur population in Xinjiang increased by nearly 2.55 million, registering a growth rate of 25%. This is much higher than the 13.99% growth rate of the entire population of Xinjiang and much higher than the 2% growth rate of the Han population in the region. Workers of all ethnic groups in Xinjiang can choose professions based on their own will, enjoy labor rights and interests. Their personal freedom is never restricted. Xinjiang protects the freedom of religion and belief of all ethnic groups in the region in accordance with law. There are more than 24,000 mosques in Xinjiang, and that's one mosque for every 530 Muslims on average. These basic facts show that there has never been so-called genocide, forced labor, or religious oppression in Xinjiang. Such inflammatory accusations are fabricated out of ignorance and prejudice. They're simply malicious and politically driven hypes and couldn't be further from the truth. The door to Xinjiang is always open. People from many countries who have visited Xinjiang have learned the facts and the truth on the ground. China also welcomes the High Commissioner for Human Rights to visit Xinjiang. The legislation on safeguarding national security in Hong Kong has plugged the long-existing legal loopholes in Hong Kong and facilitated a major turnaround from turbulence to law and order. It is conducive to the steady and sustained implementation of the policy of one country, two systems. It protects the lawful rights and freedoms that the residents of Hong Kong enjoy under the Basic Law. Nearly 3 million Hong Kong residents signed a petition in strong support of the legislation. Nearly 70% of the residents feel Hong Kong is more secure and stable since the national security law took effect. All this speaks volumes about the extensive public support for the legislation. We have every confidence in the future of Hong Kong. Madam Vice President, colleagues, we are at the beginning of the Chinese Lunar New Year of the Ox. The ox symbolizes diligence and strength and heralds a year of harvest and hope. Let us join hands to promote and protect human rights with the people-centered approach and facilitate the building of the community with a shared future for mankind. In conclusion, I wish this session of the Human Rights Council positive outcomes. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Ann-Christine Linde, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Sweden. You have the floor.
Madam President, High Commissioner, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to address the Human Rights Council today. Although I regret that we are not able to meet in person in Geneva and enjoy the buzz of the Council this time, I see the fact that the Council continues to meet and work as a sign of strength of continued multilateral cooperation. 3 areas will be the focus of my address today: democracy, women's rights, and funding for multilateral cooperation. First, democracy. In many parts of the world, democratic space is shrinking, not least for civil society. We see human rights defenders, journalists, and media workers being intimidated, harassed, and exposed to violence for simply expressing an opinion or reporting on current events. Around the world, workers are being denied their rights and representation as trade union representatives are silenced, arbitrarily arrested, or even killed. This has to end. This is why the Swedish Foreign Service is mobilizing to shine a light on the situation of workers and the lack of respect for human rights in the world of work. Disinformation and misinformation are other serious threats to democracy, whether online